On this Thursday night, new details about a deadly police pursuit in Ontario.
Someone's going to get hurt.
Why officers chased a vehicle going the wrong way on Canada's busiest highway. Plus, who survived the crash. Unrelenting unrest, the counter-protest at McGill.
It's a big shame.
As police arrest hundreds and clear the encampment at UCLA.
Get back! Get back!
And Ontario First Nations' new triumph against a neighboring chemical plant.
It's still going to be an uphill battle.
What the facility is now being ordered to do. And clearing the air, the new report card on how well Canada is doing curbing emissions.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. There is new information tonight about that police chase and horrific crash along Canada's busiest highway. The high-speed police chase going the wrong way on the 401 ended in a multi-vehicle crash. A 3-month-old baby boy was killed along with his grandparents who were visiting from India. Today, Ontario's Special Investigations Unit revealed the baby's parents, who live in Ajax, Ontario, were also in that vehicle and they survived. The robbery suspect police were chasing also died, but why he was pursued going the wrong way is still under intense scrutiny. Mike Drolet has our top story on the police radio recordings, giving a glimpse into those final moments.
It all unfolded quickly as the suspect in Monday's liquor store robbery east of Toronto turned the wrong way onto a highway on-ramp. At least one officer in pursuit raised a red flag.
Just want to make sure the Durham sergeant's aware that they're driving the opposite direction. Someone's going to get hurt.
10-4, we're calling them out.
There's probably 6 Durham cruisers that are going, following the vehicle wrong way.
We know now that officer was right, because minutes later, the suspect van would collide with a transport truck and at least 4 other vehicles, resulting in 4 deaths. And new information has come to light. According to an internal police report acquired by the Toronto Star, a senior officer tried to call off the chase 3 minutes before the deadly collision. Yet one of the officers involved believed the lights on the police car would alert the public that something was wrong.
When I looked at the standard operating procedures for police departments in Ontario, you can clearly see it's going to be difficult to justify the continuation of this pursuit from the outset.
Officers in Ontario do have some leeway when it comes to pursuits. The Police Service Act requires officers to weigh the severity of the crime against the risk to public safety. But a study released last year by the U.S.-based Police Executive Research Forum called for police to begin a pursuit only if a violent crime has been committed and there's imminent threat to the public, a much stricter policy the RCMP adopted after its own study in 2021. Vehicle pursuit alternatives include helicopters, spike belts, a device called the grappler, and the use of pit maneuvers to disable vehicles. Former West Vancouver Police Chief Cash Heath says he had his officers trained to block suspect vehicles from escaping.
We found that if you let it go more than 2 blocks, in all likelihood the supervisor may have to call it off because of the dangerous maneuvering of the suspect vehicle.
Would any of those tactics have worked in Toronto? The chase lasted 20 minutes, covering roughly 25 kilometers before entering the highway. Factors the Special Investigations Unit will have to weigh as the investigation unfolds. Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
Pro-Palestinian protesters camping out at the University of Toronto have been told to vacate that campus by 10 p.m. tonight. They have said they won't move. They've joined students at universities across Canada and the U.S., pressuring schools to divest from Israel. There are now 6 major encampments across Canada. In BC, pro-Palestinian camps have sprung up at the University of British Columbia, the University of Victoria, and Vancouver Island University. In Ontario, encampments are still set up at the University of Ottawa and at the University of Toronto. And in Quebec, the encampment at Montreal's McGill University was confronted today by a counter-protest. Pro-Israeli demonstrators gathered on the other side of the fence from where the pro-Palestinian camp is set up. Mike Armstrong was there.
The fence in front of McGill University, usually decorative, served Thursday an unintended purpose. It kept protesters and counter-protesters apart, with police in between. On the the inside the encampment. 6 days in, it swelled with supporters. A joint message calling for a ceasefire in Gaza and for McGill to divest from Israel.
The students want to leave. They don't want to stay here. They just want their demands to be met.
Bring them home!
Now, on the other side of the fence, the counter-protest. Organizers say it was called in support of Jewish students who don't feel safe on campus. Jews, they say, have been threatened and intimidated around the encampment.
I was not with an Israeli flag. I was just we're wearing a kippah. So if it's not anti-Semitism, what is it?
Well, despite no shortage of emotion, the situation didn't escalate. The encampment organizers kept people far enough away from the fence, and while police were present, riot police were stationed nearby, out of sight but ready.
From the beginning, it's been peaceful. We have, since Saturday, we were here not far where there was always a police presence.
Dismantle encampments.
Quebec's premier waded into the issue Thursday. He's calling on police to shut down the encampment. McGill is private property, he says, and has told protesters to leave.
Everybody in Quebec has to respect laws. And right now, these encampments are illegal.
Shut it down!
Now, while the premier wants the protesters out, he's not saying it has to be right away. When, he says, should be up to police. And that certainly wasn't going to be today. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Montreal.
The protests have been much bigger on campuses in the U.S., and more than 2,000 students have now been arrested. Today, President Joe Biden said the right to free speech and the rule of law must be protected, but not violent protests.
Violent protest is not protected. Peaceful protest is. It's against the law when violence occurs. Destroying property is not a peaceful protest. It's against the law. Vandalism, trespassing, breaking windows, shutting down campuses, forcing the cancellation of classes and graduations. None of this is a peaceful protest.
The University of California, Los Angeles was the focus of police action overnight. Counter-protesters had descended on the campus, and university authorities were quickly overwhelmed. Jackson Proskow reports on how frustration keeps escalating on American campuses and the challenge of how to deal with it.
In the dead of night, police in riot gear fired rubber bullets and deployed flashbangs, ripping apart barricades and clearing tents at UCLA.
We're not leaving!
More than 200 people were arrested, including this woman, who identified herself as a student.
We have to challenge these systems of oppression so that we could free Gaza and free all peoples that are oppressed.
It came the day after counter-protesters sparred with the demonstrators. In that case, police were criticized for failing to intervene.
For them to come out the next night to remove us from the encampment after they felt absolutely no obligation or duty to protect the first night, it doesn't make any sense.
Anger and division are rippling through American universities. In Washington, dueling protests were kept apart on a campus just blocks from the White House.
Police here have so far taken a hands-off approach, preferring to leave the protesters alone so long as they remain peaceful.
We're a civil society, and order must prevail.
After weeks of silence, President Joe Biden addressed the unrest. He faces heavy criticism from progressives over police use of force, while Republicans accuse him of allowing anti-Semitism and violence on campuses.
Look, it's basically a matter of fairness. It's a matter of what's right. There's the right to protest, but not the right to cause chaos.
Those words seem unlikely to have an impact, especially as the conflict rages overseas.
And really didn't tell people where he was on this issue. They really took the safe way out and probably made nobody happy.
Back at Columbia University, where the protests began, students are marching outside the now locked down campus, vowing not to give up the fight until their demands are met. Jackson Proskow, Global News, Washington.
In Gaza, there is a new snapshot of the extent of the catastrophic damage from nearly 7 months of Israeli bombardment and what it could take to rebuild. UNICEF says nearly all the roughly 600,000 children sheltering in the southern Gaza city of Rafah are injured, sick, or malnourished. And according to the Hamas-run health ministry, more than 34,500 Palestinians have been killed, most of them women and children. The destruction in Gaza, according to a new UN report, is on a scale not seen since the Second World War. The UN assessment says more than 79,000 homes have been completely destroyed, another 370,000 damaged. It estimates that in the best case scenario, it will take until 2040 to rebuild all the destroyed homes. That's if construction materials are delivered 5 times faster than after the last Gaza crisis in 2021. Israel's prime minister continues to say a ground offensive into Rafah will go ahead with or without a ceasefire deal. The proposal reportedly includes a 40-day pause in fighting to allow more humanitarian aid into Gaza and the exchange of almost 1,000 Palestinian prisoners for up to 33 Israeli hostages. Crystal Gamansing reports on where those negotiations stand and the pressure on Israel's prime minister.
Desperate and despondent, families of Israeli hostages jumped into rush hour traffic to grab attention. For months, chants of "now" and "all of them now" have risen above the streets and squares across Israel to remind their leaders about loved ones languishing in Gaza.
We need to stop the war. We need to bring back the hostages home. Enough. It's 7 months already. There is no time for the hostages. They will be all dead.
While the world waits for Hamas to respond to Israel's latest proposal to pause fighting and exchange prisoners, Israeli military vehicles are assembling near Gaza's southern border, possibly to enter Rafah, the southern city where more than 1 million displaced people are sheltering without adequate facilities.
It's on Hamas. Hamas has to decide whether it will take this deal and actually advance the situation for the people that it purports to care about in Gaza.
Despite international and some local opposition to a ground offensive in Rafah, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said that the operation will go forward regardless of a deal. A statement he reiterated Thursday, saying Israel will do what is necessary in order to win. Netanyahu and his military leadership have also pledged to bring the 133 remaining hostages home. Blocking traffic, holding a banner that reads, "Rafah or hostages, choose life." The priority for these Israelis is clear. Crystal Gamansing, Global News, London.
A 4th teenager has been charged with second-degree murder in the stabbing death of a Halifax student who came to Canada as a refugee from Syria. 16-year-old Ahmed Al-Marash was found badly injured in a shopping mall parkade last week. He later died in hospital. 3 other teenagers are being held in custody until their next court appearance. A chemical plant next to an Ontario First Nation is ordered to shut down. Coming up, what it must do if it wants to reopen. The people of a small Ontario First Nation, long exposed to high levels of pollution, are celebrating a victory tonight. The province has ordered a chemical plant to stay shut until the province is satisfied it can operate more safely. Many people in Aamjiwnaang First Nation say they became sick last month after high levels of the cancer-causing chemical benzene were detected. They, along with the province, have said a chemical plant across the street is the primary source. That plant voluntarily closed for maintenance just over a week ago. Now the province says it must stay shut until changes are made. Carolyn Jarvis reports.
It definitely does feel like, a big win for us. Like nothing this big has really happened before.
It's not often a small community of scarcely 1,000 people forces a chemical plant to its knees. But after weeks of outcry and anger, today there was excitement and a feeling that the people of Aamjiwnaang were finally heard.
Our people have been getting sick and it's just gone on for far too long.
The province of Ontario ordered Ineos Styrolution, located mere steps from the First Nation, to remain closed until it can limit its pollution. Specifically, benzene, a cancer-causing chemical which for weeks has been detected at alarming levels at air monitors just across the street.
We need to think about what happens when they do reopen.
The province has a list of conditions for restarting, which must be completed and approved to mitigate benzene emissions. But the concern among some is that those measures don't go far enough.
if you look at the requirements for restarting the facility, they are not best in class.
In a statement Tuesday, INEOS said no one on our site has reported feeling unwell, and it did not breach its emissions limits set at the time in April. That's because INEOS and several other industrial plants around Armstrong are exempt from Ontario's annual limit for benzene under what's called a technical standard.
And I think we've seen that has resulted in levels of benzene in Sarnia that pose unacceptable risks to the people who live there.
And so while there is optimism, the people of Armstrong know they must remain advocates for their own health.
We are not backing down.
Carolyn Jarvis, Global News, Toronto.
Reality check ahead. Is Canada making meaningful progress in curbing carbon emissions? There are some signs Canada is making progress on reducing carbon emissions. New federal data shows emissions in 2022 were the lowest they've been in 25 years, with the exception of the first 2 years of the pandemic. The government claims its climate policies are working. Mackenzie Gray has a reality check on whether Canada is actually on track to meet its targets.
It's a central part of the Liberals' political message.
If you stand in the way of clean energy development and pollution reduction, you're standing in the way of sustained economic success for Canadians.
But the latest report from the Environment Department outlines a mixed bag on their efforts to curb emissions. In 2022, greenhouse gases actually went up 1.3% to a total of 708 megatons. That's the equivalent of 260 million cars on the road. Despite the slight increase, the Environment Minister points to a bigger trend.
This updated report shows significantly lower emissions by 44 million tons than our pre-pandemic levels. Emissions are at their lowest they've been in 25 years, with the exception of 2020 and 2021 during COVID.
Emissions cuts, alongside a growing Canadian economy, an important sign for environmentalists.
You think about electric vehicles, LED light bulbs, energy efficiency in industry, and those are counteracting the rise in emissions from more economic activity.
While that is a positive trend, it's not good enough to meet the government's pollution targets, according to the Environment Commissioner.
Surprisingly, there is no overarching industrial decarbonization policy to provide innovation, science, and economic development Canada with a clear picture of which industries are most in need of funds to reduce emissions.
The Liberals' own goal is to cut emissions by 40% from 2005 levels by 2030, but currently they've only been slashed by 7.1%.
We're not bending the curve at the scale and pace needed. We know we need to do much more in order to avoid really the most catastrophic and irreversible outcomes.
One thing that's not included in the emissions numbers, the impact of natural disasters like forest fires, which last year alone, Donna, were estimated to be triple an entire year's worth of emissions.
All right, Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa, thank you. There was a bit of a signal today from the Governor of the Bank of Canada about interest rates. Tiff Macklem told MPs today all key inflation indicators are moving in the right direction.
What most Canadians want to know is when are we going to reduce our policy interest rate? The short answer is we are getting closer. We are seeing what we need to see. We just need to see it for longer.
The next decision on whether to cut rates is June 5th. For now, the key interest rate is holding at 5%. In the U.S., the Federal Reserve held its benchmark rate steady at about 5.5%, saying it is taking longer than expected there to get inflation under control. Next, the power of student protest and how it can force change. There is a long history of student protest on university campuses, young people objecting to what they perceive to be oppression and injustice and making their voices heard. The idealism of youth can be a powerful force, and it is, for the most part, peaceful. Eric Sorensen looks at how campus protests have stayed the same over the years and what's changed.
At the core of growing campus protests are students, idealistic and passionate. There is a noble history to it at Columbia University in New York, where students against the war in Gaza occupied iconic Hamilton Hall this week. Columbia was at the heart of the anti-war movement that fueled America's turning against the Vietnam War in the 1960s. Mark Rudd was there.
And we're going back now. What they're doing is they're trying to wake up the rest of us
Rudd sees parallels today as students watch the bombing and devastation in Gaza.
I think they consider it to be a moral atrocity, and they're sick at heart. And as I was 56 years ago, and we felt the moral impetus to act. They're doing the same thing.
But there are differences. 1960s campuses were mostly white, privileged kids united against a U.S.-led war. Today, campuses are much more diverse, giving rise to divergent views, including support for Palestinians in Gaza.
Students have chosen to join the call that stands in a steadfast solidarity with the people of Gaza.
Young people are often very committed to issues of global justice as they see them. Campuses have always been a place where social movements found a voice, found the ability to organize.
From the river to the sea!
But when protesters chant from the river to the sea, that sounds to many Jewish people like promoting the annihilation of Israel.
Chanting for the erasure of the Jewish state and the death of my family. So I do feel a little heartbroken by this.
Students clashing with students, a sign of the diversity on campuses today. One student sees the pro-Palestinian protests in solidarity with student movements of the past.
We have not only the privilege, but the responsibility to continue in the shoes of those who came before us. That's what education is for, right? It's to frame the way that you look at the world.
The military conflict in Gaza has become a social struggle in North America. Support for Palestinians growing, traditional backing for Israel being tested, and it's all playing out once more on college campuses. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
That's Global National for this Thursday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is Grossmore National Park, Newfoundland and Labrador. We'd love to see your Canada. Please email it to viewers@globalnational.com. And thanks for watching. Farah Nasser will be at the anchor desk tomorrow, and I will see you again on Monday. Bye-bye.